Millennials were being called slackers, people weren't taking them serious, people were saying they're always looking at their phone. But our research queried, what do you use your phone for? And 80% of them said they use their cell phones to connect with a nonprofit or a cause they care about.
Women are being given cell phones and using them as a weapon against rape.
No question. We're super excited by this whole category we call tech for good.
Welcome to the Contrary. I'm host Bonnie Urbay. This week, we continue our series of talks with women thought leaders. This week with Jean Case, who is CEO of the Case Foundation and chair of the National Geographic Society. Welcome.
Thanks, Bonnie. It's a delight to be here with you today.
So you are a very well-known leader in philanthropy and leader in technology. How do those two converge for you?
Well, you know, interestingly, I'm sort of most affiliated with AOL from my tech days, although I was at two startups before AOL. But when I landed at AOL, it was a young company. We hadn't created the service yet. But if you'd walked the halls in those days, you would have seen people on a mission to democratize access to ideas and information and communication. So it's not quite the leap that it appears to be from the outside to go from what was really a company on a mission, basically, to change the world, over to this work where we created our family foundation, the Case Foundation, in 1997, really to do similar things. We say we invest in people and ideas that can change the world.
Tell me about some of your major investments.
Sure. Well,
and how they have changed the world.
Sure. Well, you know, we've done a number of things really all over the globe. An early area of focus for us coming out of technology, as I had after I retired from AOL, I came in as CEO of the Case Foundation when we created it. We really focused on what was then the digital divide. You know, at that time there was very uneven access to the internet. And to communications more broadly, and we were very concerned about that. So we put an initiative, a collaborative together with many partners and put 1,000 after-school technology centers around the nation. We had heard from way too many teachers that they could be in a classroom and one kid had access to the most sophisticated, you know, technology and printers, and another kid couldn't even get on the internet. So imagine not a level playing field in the classroom. So we specifically nested them in low-income communities, and it was really great to see the impact there.
Do you think there's, even to this day when technology is so widely available, is there still a gap? Are there people who lack access for?
No question, there still is. I think it's much less of a gap in the United States than it was back in the day for us. But when you go around the world, of course, the gap grows wider. But we're really encouraged by how the cost of technology has come down, how innovations, for instance, we back a company called Brick in Africa that I work with, and they're taking internet to the last mile. So we're doing things like taking these very rugged Wi-Fi enabled devices and putting them out in classrooms, on public buses, and in some cases for Africans that are in those communities, that's the only access they have to the internet in their day. So we're really backing a lot of solutions still that are continuing to take connectivity forward.
In a lot of low-income countries in India, in Asia and in Africa, women are being given cell phones and using them as a weapon against rape.
No question. We're super excited by this whole category we call tech for good, which is really, you know, apps and all kinds of different ways that you can use your cell phone, you can use access to information, etc., to make a difference in the world. And, you know, one area of focus our foundation has had for a decade now, we've done the largest research of millennials around their attitudes and perceptions around good. Okay, and I remember one of the first years we came out with the research, millennials were being called slackers, people weren't taking them serious, people were saying they're always looking at their phone, but our research queried, what do you use your phone for? And 80% of them said they use their cell phones to connect with a nonprofit or a cause they care about. And I often thought, you know, if we could really see these devices as empowering and for good, you know, we might take a little different look at the world.
Now, you were an early woman in technology.
I was, yes.
But there's still talk that it's mainly a man's field. Are you working on that issue? If
yeah,
so, what
obviously
are you doing
it's an
about
area I'm quite passionate about, but I do have to say I was very early in technology. I joined the first online service in 1982. Had to explain to my mom what I did for a living. She had no idea. But at that time, I didn't find the same atmosphere that we see today out across the tech world. And, I've really tried to kind of peel that back and say, well, what really changed? The early tech generation was spread across the country. They came together, different devices, different backgrounds, et cetera. It wasn't just kind of what we call the white guys on the coast that we really see dominate technology today. They don't just dominate technology, but they dominate where new investment is going in new startups as well, and that's something we're really focused on to make sure that women, people of color, and people between the coasts are getting both the attention, the capital, the mentoring, that we're seeing going to kind of, what do I want to say, too much consolidation on the coast. We say 78% of venture capital last year went to 3 places: New York, Boston, and California. And California got over 50% of it. So, that leaves the rest of the country fighting over about a quarter of the pie. Women only received 10% of venture capital last year. That means 90% went to men. And people of color, particularly African Americans, 1% of founders were African Americans that received capital last year. So it's a great concern, and it's funny, because we like to think of ourselves as this great diversified nation where the American dream is available to anyone. But when you peel back the onion and look at the data today, where's the capital, where's the resources going, et cetera, it's to an elite crowd. And as a result, our economy is at risk. We're not taking advantage of building a strong, diversified economy. And there really isn't social justice in the mix as well.
Well, yeah, here we are in this era, in the Me Too and the Time's Up era, and women and persons of color are making all kinds of progress against sexual assault, sexual harassment.
Right.
But still, those data you cite are, so emblematic of the problem. What do you think needs to be done, and what, if anything, is your foundation doing about it?
It's a major area of focus for it. We call it inclusive entrepreneurship. And we don't just work alone, we try to bring partners along as well. And what we're really trying to do is shine a light on what are called accelerators out there, out in communities, these places that will help women and people of color if they have a business idea, train them up, introduce them to mentors, hopefully find pathways to getting capital, to getting funded for their businesses. We're super passionate about it. But it isn't like there's one silver bullet at work here. I think it's going to take a tapestry of focus, investment, and resources around the country to really get to where we need to be. But I'm very encouraged today.
You are. Tell me, what do you see?
Well, I think
happening?
The data is so stark that I think so much of it has not been intentional in any way, meaning to leave others behind. And I've been deeply encouraged by the number of people, whether they be individual investors, whether they be institutions, banks, you name it, when you sit and you kind of share the data with them and they say, I had no idea. I want to do something about that now. And so we feel like there's building momentum in this space, and we're trying to make sure new data is out there to make sure we're tracking the progress that's being made, understand where some of these interventions will make a difference for women and people of color and people in the middle of the nation. My husband has led something called Rise of the Rest, in which he takes a bus out for a week at a time and visits a different city every day. And he specifically picks cities that are counterintuitive when you think of, say, an innovation hub. But he goes in there and he brings press along with him, he brings influencers along with him. He convenes both investors and entrepreneurs in the community.
Wow.
He brings big companies with supply chains who could actually, do contracts with some of these unknown companies in these smaller towns. And it's been amazing. He's done about 35 cities to date. And we're really happy to see how that ecosystem in each community where they've gone is beginning to thrive and bring more capital. And
move Silicon Valley out of Silicon Valley
correct.
And off of Wall Street.
Right. Well, we like to remind people that the history of our economy, Silicon Valley was a peach orchard not that long ago, but we don't remember that. We don't have institutional memory about these things. And what was the hot place? Detroit. If you were an engineer in America in the 1950s, there's only one town you wanted to be in, and that was Detroit, Michigan. But we saw what happened to Detroit, right? It sort of lost what we call its entrepreneurial mojo. and it faded and ran into trouble. And
well,
Silicon
and
Valley
globalization
emerged. All
happened.
kinds of things happened.
Right.
But back when Detroit was the new hot thing, Pittsburgh was dying, because back in the day, 100 years ago, if you were, wanting to build a great business, chances are you wanted to be in Pittsburgh.
Railroads and coal.
Yes, absolutely. So it's really important for us to remember that these things have cycles, and while we feel really good about what Silicon Valley has brought us, we really would be a stronger nation and stronger economy if we spread the love, if we make sure we're backing entrepreneurs all across the nation, no matter their background or where they live. We call it race, place, and gender. That's kind of the focus we need to have.
Race, place, and gender. I see where you're working on the place,
Yep.
with where your husband
Right.
is with the bus tour. What are you doing specifically about diversifying technology racially?
People of color are a real focus for us, particularly in this work where we're trying to back entrepreneurs of color. There was some data a couple years ago that said the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs were Black women. But a lot of people don't know that data. So there are just treasure troves of talent and ideas and new innovations sitting out there, and it's ours for the taking. But if we're only focusing out on the coast, on the elites, the kind of innovations that people will build either from the middle of the country, from a farming community, from a challenged economic background, are just going to be fundamentally different than what people that are living an elite life on a coast will even think about. And we need those innovations too.
You practice what you call impact investing,
I do,
correct?
yeah.
What is that, and how does it relate to philanthropy?
Sure. It's a term that's been bandied about a lot, and so different people hear different things and they're not clear on the definition. We define it as an investment that provides both a financial and a social return, so that has a social benefit that's tied to it. We say, really, for it to be a true impact investment, it needs to have clear intentionality, saying, okay, we're here to have this impact. Okay, and be very clear. The company has to be clear, and the investors have to be clear that they know what they're getting into. Transparency around that to make sure all stakeholders know, and then measurement of the impact they're trying to have. So it really is a new class of both entrepreneurs and investors, led largely, by the way, on the investor front, by women who are beginning to inherit wealth, beginning to establish their own wealth as their careers have taken off. And they don't want to invest the same old way that it's been done, just merely looking at a financial return. They've been conscious consumers, saying, what is this brand? Is it a good guy, bad woman, bad woman, whatever. And they're asking the same thing about their investments now. So this impact investing movement is really exciting.
Tell me about how that relates to philanthropy, though.
Sure.
Are you talking about, are the grants seen as investments? Do they have to pay back any part of what you give them?
Sure. Well, let me explain a little bit about it. Impact investing from a philanthropic standpoint can go forward a couple of ways. The larger philanthropic institutions that have been around a long time have billions of dollars in their endowments. They're required to only spend 5% a year. So essentially, every year, if they're not doing impact investing, they're only using 5% of what they have to make a difference in the world. It's almost like they're doing this to the other 95%. And so when we challenge a lot of them to say, well, what's in your portfolio? It's stunning when they take a look and they realize that some of the things they've been investing in are in direct odds with what the mission of the organization is. So we're saying, well, could there be kind of a middle ground? Might you look at peeling off some of that investment that comes from the 95%, the big dollars, okay, and putting it into places that are more mission aligned with what you're here to do as an organization? So that's one way.
So the foundation buys stock.
So let's say, for instance, you are a foundation that cares a lot about the environment and you're doing a lot of grants towards sustainable energy, et cetera. Well, you probably don't want to have a lot of oil and gas over in what you're investing in over there. But guess what? Energy happens to be one of the leading sectors for impact investing. So you could switch your oil and gas investments into clean energy and be more consistent and aligned with what you're there to do. The second way it can happen is you actually can use grant money for investment purposes. There's some special rules around it, but we're seeing foundations play more and more of an active role that way.
Any stories to share about people you've supported from the Case Foundation?
Sure. And particularly, I'd love to just tell you some that are at this intersection of inclusive entrepreneurship and impact investing.
Yeah, please.
So there's a young woman, in New England, and she was raised by a mom who was on welfare, single mom. And she talks about how she watched her mom really struggle each month to pay the power bill. So I was raised by a single mom. I saw the same thing, okay? And it's stressful for a family because, if you can't make that payment, the lights go off, okay? You really aren't functioning in the household. So she recalls this with, great clarity. And so as a solar movement came about, she got really excited for people in the old neighborhood that she lived in. And she began asking them, are you looking at solar? It could be a lower cost. Well, it turns out, of course, people in lower income neighborhoods, they don't own their houses for the most part. They rent. They're not in control of whether you're going to put a solar panel up there, and if you are, they don't necessarily have money to do it. In addition, a number of homes around the nation just aren't positioned correctly to receive the solar panels. So she created what's called solar farms in low-income neighborhoods that serve neighborhoods, so a slate of solar panels that everybody can share, the sharing economy where it's really, really needed. And to me, it's just a great example of someone who lived a problem differently maybe than others have who are building businesses and said, I have a business solution for this. Is
she doing it just locally, or has she
No,
gone national
she's
with
expanding out from where she started, yeah, and she's been celebrated. Her name is Steph Spears, and she's been celebrated in a lot of places. Another great story, there's two women out in Oakland, California, not San Francisco, Oakland, okay? And they started a company called Revolution Foods. Essentially, they were two moms, two really smart MBA moms, but they're two moms. When they went into the school system and saw what their children were being fed, they were horrified. And as moms, we do go into the school. Not that dads don't, but moms are there in a much more prevalent way, still today, I think. And so they were. And they said, oh my gosh, we have to do something about this. So they created a company called Revolution Foods, and they offer what is called kid-inspired, chef-crafted foods. And these are really healthy, delicious alternatives in public schools today. They've served tens of millions of meals. They're all over the country. And it's a great example of an entrepreneurial solution to really what would have been seen as a public sector problem.
You talked about solar.
Yeah.
What about other sources of renewable energy?
Yeah, as I said, I think the renewable energy...
Windmills, are you involved in windmills at all?
So we are not specifically involved, but we're championing those out there who are building great solutions with sustainable energy.
What do you think is going to happen to women and people of color in the current environment politically?
Yeah. Well, I think they're finding their voice. I think we've seen this. We've seen it, I'd say over recent years, but we've seen it over recent weeks. If you watched the Oscars the other night, I think women really found their voice. We're super excited to see the Time's Up movement going forward.
Are you involved with that?
I'm not officially involved, but I consider myself a great champion of what they're doing and have met with them, and we keep up with them. We think they're moving the needle. And, what they have there, of course, is a legal defense fund for women who can't afford to take on, the cases if they've seen sexual harassment, for instance. So we're seeing a lot of movement out there, and both among women and among people of color. I mean, Black Lives Matter was a time, I feel like, where the voice was really heard, and I think it's had an enduring impact in a lot of communities. So, I think where we sit today might be in that awkward time, right? We might be coming to maybe a cusp time. We might be coming to an end of the old way, but we're not yet there on the new way. But for many of us who are out in the field every day and looking around, as I said earlier, I'm very optimistic.
Are you optimistic? Do you see, one question we've grappled with on the show many times is, it's wonderful that the Harvey Weinsteins of the world get taken down, but what about the waitress in Louisiana who is working in a diner and being sexually assaulted by her boss?
Right. Well, to be honest with you,
the trickle down.
Right. The mission of Time's Up is to be cross-sector, and one of the most beautiful things that happened, they showed me when I was out there, is they got a letter from an association of basically female farm workers, okay, who said, we are your sisters and we're with you. And their real goal at Time's Up is to make sure that across all sectors, across all backgrounds, across all layers, the same rights and opportunities are there for women. And they certainly are starting a national dialogue. There's no question about that.
And where do you think it'll lead?
Well, I'm hoping it leads to a leveling of the playing field and to more opportunity for women and more paths forward if women find they're being held back.
Now, you served under President George W.,
yes,
as chair of the President's Council on Service and Civic Participation.
It's a mouthful, isn't it? It was for me when I was in the role, too.
It is. What did you do there, and what did you learn through those experiences?
Yeah, so really what we were trying to do was galvanize both volunteer service and civic engagement across the nation. But our largest initiative, which still goes forward today that I'm really excited by, was working with the nonprofit sector and saying to them, what are your greatest needs and what might we do to help you? And very clearly, there were areas of talent that the nonprofit sector just couldn't compete to get. They couldn't compete with private sector wages or stock options or whatever. And there are things you would understand: technology, recruiting, business planning, etc. So we went out to the private sector and we said, okay, the nonprofit sector needs your help. What will you do? And we created an initiative called Billion Plus Change. And we asked the corporate sector to give $1 billion in pro bono talent to the nonprofit sector. Well, that happened. We surpassed it, and the number today is over $5 billion in pro bono talent going out to the nonprofit sector. So to me, that was an enduring initiative of that council, but it was really by listening to the nonprofit sector and saying, we care deeply about civic engagement, we care deeply about service, and we care about what you do in the community, and we responded to their call.
And tell me how these cross-governmental, cross-sector partnerships between government, business, and the social sector. Tell me about some of them specifically and how they work.
Sure. Well, let me tell you about one. First of all, at the Case Foundation, everything we do is cross-sector. So we always try to have a public sector partner, private sector partner, other philanthropies, and a nonprofit. With the Obama administration, we did something with the White House called the Summit on Innovation, and we partnered together to do that. And there we trained up 35 agencies on sort of strategies around innovation and specifically tapping the wisdom of the citizens out across the land. So as agencies would have big challenges, there was no way for them to say, oh, well, maybe the smartest people on this issue aren't in this room, okay? But we created something called challenge.gov. And today, every day, there are hundreds of challenges by federal agencies put on there that citizens anywhere from any background, but particularly with expertise, can come in and play a role to help find solutions for our communities.
And how did that result in more funding for
did.
Some of the solutions that were
yes,
that
because
were
what we saw then,
defined?
of course, was a philanthropic community came along and said, we'll help get that funded. And our favorite story really is that what it created was really, really diverse tables, because as citizens would come in to be part of the solution, often you had people that would never be exposed to the challenges. So the Ebola suit needed a new design. They realized it was actually part of the problem in, if you recall,
transmission,
yes,
sure,
in dealing with Ebola. So we did a grand challenge for that. And it was a wedding dress designer out of Baltimore who sat on the winning team. And the ultimate suit that emerged, many said, would have never been the suit it was, but for this woman who had very practical, right, really practical experience about, don't do that because you'll never be able to replicate that, or it'll be too expensive, or it'll be too hard. And so they give her great credit for playing a role as a citizen in giving all these scientists and doctors perspectives they just wouldn't have had.
That's amazing. So she, a wedding dress designer,
absolutely
designed the suit that people could
she
go in.
She played on a team that designed the suit. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And how did her background as a wedding dress designer help design that suit that saved people who were helping people with Ebola not get it?
Well, when I came into philanthropy, I saw amazingly dedicated, talented people really focused on daunting challenges. But sometimes they would forget to ask the people you're trying to serve what they really need. And sometimes the people who might bring really practical solutions based on their own backgrounds weren't part of devising the solution, right? It would be a professional group under fluorescent lights. What we love about the Ebola suit story and about our work in challenge.gov, which anyone could go to and look at today, really calls citizens from all walks to come in, and whatever they can bring to help a challenge, they can bring. And I think she's a great example of that.
Thank you so much, Jean Case, CEO of the Case Foundation, and chair of the Nat Geographic Society Board of Directors. We really appreciate your time and all your insight.
Great, it was really great to be with you. Thank you so much for all you've done.
You are more than welcome. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And if you think to the contrary, please join us next week.